This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
The committee is resuming its study on the pre-budget consultation in advance of the 2025 budget. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. With us here today, we have Vinay Brith, Canada, and representing Vinay Brith, the Director of Research and Advocacy, Mr. Richard Robertson. Welcome. From the Canadian Independent Screen Fund for Black and People of Color Creators, we have co-chair Lalita Krishna and Executive Director Sally Lee. From the Canadian Labour Congress, senior economist there, D.T. Cochrane is with us, as well as we have the Canadian Trucking Alliance, Senior Vice President of Policy, Jeffrey Wood. From the Climate Emergency Unit, Team Lead, Seth Klein is joining us, as well as the organizer for Youth Climate Corps, and that is Bushra Asghar. And from the Réseau FADUC, we have its president, Giselle Tassé-Goodman, and Special Advisor of Government Relations, Philippe Poirier-Monet, starting with MP Kelly for the first 6 minutes, please.
Thanks. To the Trucking Association, so how much does the carbon tax cost your industry?
Thank you for the question. So our estimates are, at least in the 2024 year, it will add an additional $2 billion to the cost of trucking services. That's approximately, if I was to break it down for you on a per truck basis, that's adding an additional $15,000 to $20,000 per year per truck in fuel costs.
Okay, so a per 15 to 20,000 per truck.
Per truck.
So that's the projection for this year in 2024.
Correct.
Okay, and the current government, the government currently plans to increase this in the years to come. What will that? Go ahead.
That is correct. So the tax, the per liter charge on for the fuel or for the carbon tax increases, I'm not exactly sure on the schedule, but I think by 2030 those costs will increase to approximately $4 billion annually.
So
it has an escalator in it, and we projected that out to 2030.
Okay, and so what does this do to investment in your industry?
I'm not sure what it does to an investment in the industry, other than it makes from a competitive standpoint or a supply chain, it's grossly inflating the cost of the supply chain.
Can your customers afford to just pay more for your services?
So in our world, typically those costs are passed along. Passed along to our customers, which in turn are passed along to Canadians, and in turn make our economy less productive and less competitive. So, in some instances, those costs can be passed along with the increasing use of the spot market, what we call the spot market versus contract rates or contract costing. It's becoming more and more difficult for fleets to absorb that or to pass it along, so they end up absorbing it. So it's certainly
right.
A challenge. That we would like to see addressed in the short term.
You mentioned that margins are razor thin, so there really isn't anything that can be done other than passing it on and making life more expensive for Canadians. Is that fair to say?
Margins are extremely thin. It's an extremely competitive business, high volume, low margin. It is a challenge.
Right. So you recommend that this tax be scrapped?
At a minimum, pause it for 4 years. Until we can get a handle on whether or not we have alternative fuel sources or power propulsion sources in the long term. But no, ideally the tax goes away.
Yeah, you've mentioned that no such propulsion systems exist for long haul trucking. That's correct?
So diesel is king right now. There are a host of propulsion systems being looked at, but by no means is it anywhere close to being ready for the road or ready to replace diesel. So. Again, we are doing everything we can from an industry's perspective in supporting that research and trying everything. There's no silver bullet in the alternative propulsion right now, but again, we're supportive of that. It's our it's as good corporate citizens, we want to do the right thing for the environment, lower our carbon footprint, lower our GHG emissions. But right now, the technology just isn't there, and we're gonna need some more time to figure this out. And again, hence our concern with the rationale for the carbon tax.
Yeah, well, thanks for pointing that part out. I mean, I guess it's fair to say that you don't burn diesel in trucks just because you like the smell. I mean, it's a lack of an alternative. You have tremendous incentive in your industry to discover new, more efficient, less emitting sources of propulsion, but until then, they don't exist. In the meantime, you have a cost that is that's being piled onto a low margin business and being passed on to consumers that are increasingly unable to pay the cost. Is that a fair summary?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, the federal government has two carbon taxes. They call the second one a clean fuel standard, but it is really another tax. How does that affect your business and your industry?
I'm not the expert in that area, sir, but it certainly it would have an impact. We've been having a number of discussions with Environment Climate Change Canada on that, and I can get you some more info as follow up, sir.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because this is also another tax that paints you into a corner where there are no alternatives for long haul delivery, and so you don't have a choice. You just have to pay it and pass it on to everybody in the supply chain to the point where that it reaches consumers. So, tell us about the end users in your industry. I mean, it's food, groceries is a huge one. Are there a number? Can you maybe list some of the consumer impacts on the cost of trucking?
So trucking touches everything that you have, eat, touch, buy. Trucking is integral to the Canadian supply chain and bringing Canadians and their businesses everything they need. It's critical. It's integral. Hopefully that answers the question. It's everything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, MP Kelly. And now to MP Zarowitz, please.
No one wants to talk about the pandemic anymore, and I think that for many years to come, we're going to be evaluating the psychological impact of the pandemic on our lives. I will tell you, though, it is largely understood that if we didn't have our arts and cultural activities, we would not have survived the pandemic. And in my riding of Davenport, I feel very blessed to have a very, very strong arts and cultural community, a lot of innovators, a lot of creators. And so I feel very blessed by interacting with them. I will tell you, and I appreciated you pointing out the economic importance of the sector, and I think we often don't hear enough of that. I'd also want to reinforce the social aspects. We are a big country. Arts and culture actually help us to understand each other and bring us together, share our stories. And I'd also say to you, it helps us to understand the world around us. There's so much tremendous change that's happening, and I think it's hard to absorb or even understand. And I think through our visual arts, through our movies, through our music, we are better understanding what is actually happening in the world, and we can better articulate it. Now, saying all of that, we've spent a lot of money coming through the pandemic. We've come through a really hard time, inflation. It's now finally coming down. And so now we're trying to make decisions for Budget 2025. So at a time of limited resources, why do you believe it's important for us to prioritize, funding the Canadian Independent Screen Fund and other arts and culture initiatives at this time?
Well, in the case of CISF, I would say that the power of screen-based storytelling is truly profound. I feel that the government at this point has a historic opportunity to be a driving force in transforming racial equity in the Canadian screen-based sector and to shape Canadian culture. Mm-hmm. Now, as you said, more urgently than ever, we really do need stories that challenge stereotypes, foster understanding, and bring people together. it's our hope to see CISF being funded as a strategic investment to build an inclusive future for all Canadian creators whose work will influence our national voice, positively impact communities across the country. And, you did mention the economic impact. And I would say, we really need to capitalize on this, what I consider to be a competitive advantage in terms of tapping in to our diasporic communities to reach global audiences, global markets, and bring what we believe to be truly Canadian stories out to the world.
The Youth Climate Corps is an intriguing idea. I wonder if you could explain to us briefly how that differs from youth employment programs or training programs that currently exist.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest difference is that what we are proposing would be a 2-year-long program. So we're not just teaching young people how to install a solar panel. I think a lot of current government programs are 4 months long or maybe a year long, but they are not as substantial as what we're proposing, which would be 2 years in length. It would also be paid at a thriving, decent wage, as well as the linkage to a long-term career pathway for young people. So I really think that that is what's distinguishing us from what currently exists in terms of the basket of different measures for youth.
Thank you. Now, what do you see as the key steps involved in implementing the YCC? And can you outline how the $1 billion per year investment should be allocated?
Well, our hope is that we could get a program stood up fairly quickly and that would begin with an initial investment in the budget. We do think, there's a logic to this program being cost shared with provincial governments or territorial governments. And I think there's a reasonable expectation that there are a number of provincial governments that would be keen to cost match with the federal government. I'm in British Columbia. I think the BC government might well be interested in that, the Manitoba government, very possibly the Quebec government, the PEI government. I'm thinking about governments with very active climate plans. And I think there's a place here for partnership with post-secondary institutes, and with the labor movement for the apprenticeship piece of this. You can sort of see a trajectory looking south of the border. It was a year ago, September, that the Biden administration announced an American Climate Corps. They invited input from young people and community organizations about the nature of what those jobs could be. They rolled out the program early this calendar year. The first 10,000 young people were employed this past summer. So it can happen when the will is there. It can happen very quickly.
Thank you. I read recently that the true youth unemployment rate is actually quite disturbingly high, somewhere approaching 15-16%, and a lot of young people are despondent, not only about their economic futures, but about the future of the planet. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the anticipated economic benefits of the YCC for Canadian youth and for Canadian society?
I can take a first stab at that if you would like. We're not in the same place, so it's not clear which of us should answer. I think there'd be huge payback. First of all, just to take the example of apprenticeships, we know that when somebody has apprenticeship training, their income is about $15,000 to $16,000 higher than if they just have a high school education. So you can anticipate rolling benefits in terms of earnings, in terms of tax returns back to the federal government. Bushra spoke about the fact that many industries are wrestling with skill shortages. And I think that there are, in fact, climate infrastructure projects across the country that are looking for funding, particularly to train up enough people. We've partnered with Sacred Earth Solar in this campaign and some Indigenous groups where there's all kinds of projects that could be scaled up at a much faster rate with sufficient funding for the training. So there's those clear economic benefits, but as you also allude to, there's mental health benefits. We know from research from about a year ago from Lakehead University, a survey of 1,000 young people across the country, that close to 80% of those young people report that climate change impacts their mental health. About a third of them are it gives them pause about considering having families. So there's something in this call, I think, that beyond the economic benefits, beyond the training and career path, it's this invitation to find a common sense of purpose in doing something that actually meets this moment.
Thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze a quick question to Mr. Cochrane if I can. Mr. Cochrane, in the CLC's pre-budget submission, you point out that Canada's social housing currently makes up only 3.5% of Canada's housing stock, and that's about half the OECD average of 7.1%. Can you outline why Canada has fallen so far behind the OECD peers with respect to non-market housing stock, and what impact doubling Canada's percentage of non-market housing might have on housing prices and affordability across the country?
The government just withdrew from the housing provision role that it had previously to a much bigger degree than its international peers. And that resulted in much less of this very, very important part of the housing market. It doesn't have to be a massive piece to reduce price pressures by a large degree, because people who now have access to this housing aren't participating in the process of bidding up housing in the market. And so that's going to pull down prices for rentals and houses more generally as part of just a general increase of supply. So we need to make sure that everyone has access to housing. More social housing will improve that access, and it will help reduce prices across the entire housing market.
In your first recommendation, you talk about that federal grant programs, you want to ensure that those projects will align with the Canadian anti-racism strategy, changing systems and transforming lives. And in the commentary around that recommendation, you specifically note the Leif Maroof scandal, which was a terrible scandal where someone who clearly expressed anti-Semitic views and hateful views towards Jews and actually received federal money. But when I read this, it reminded me of another scandal that unfolded over the summer, which was the appointment back in May or June by Minister Virani of Mr. Detani to head the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And eventually Mr. Detani was appointed and then resigned, and it was a real mess for the government. But it got me thinking whether or not you think that this recommendation, the application of Canada's anti-racism strategy, should also be applied to the way appointments are conducted. And I note, in fact, in your public comments, you said that the Detani saga highlights critical flaws in the government's process for vetting. We call for vetting candidates, we call for a thorough investigation to ensure such oversights are prevented in the future. I wonder if you could comment on that, or whether you have other ideas as to how the vetting of appointments, particularly with something so critical as the Canadian Human Rights Commission, are conducted properly so that Canadians can have confidence in the impartiality of people who are appointed to such important positions.
Absolutely. The implementation of Canada's anti-racism strategy is absolutely critical to fighting all forms of racism and hatred in Canada, including anti-Semitism. So whether or not we're applying the anti-racism and hatred the anti-racism strategy towards our federal granting apparatuses, or whether or not we're applying it towards federal appointments, these are measures that should be in place and that should be adopted in order to ensure that all government action, a whole of government approach to the implementation of the anti-racism strategy is being implemented. So absolutely, we believe that the adoption of a recommendation that would have our federal granting apparatuses align with the anti-racism strategy. It's just a first step, and to see that then utilized to ensure that all government appointments are in line with the strategy is a logical next step.
Thank you. And just on to another topic. I know that B'nai B'rith put out a statement back in the spring that they were very concerned that the federal government had chosen to reinstate funding for UNRWA. And the record of UNRWA is pretty clear. For years, we've known that they have anti-Semitic school materials where they teach children to hate Israel, to hate Jews. They show them maps without Israel even being on the map. Those reports were put forward by Impact SE and have been widely reviewed. And then revelations came out about actual employees of UNRWA that were actually participated in the October 7th massacres. But most recently, in the counterattack of Israel and Lebanon, a fellow named Fatah Sharif Abu El Amin, a Hamas leader in Lebanon, a senior Hamas leader, was killed. But the revelation came out that he was also the head of the UNRWA Teachers Union, which is not a small, low-level position. Are you even more concerned than you were in the spring that the Canadian government should not be funding UNRWA?
Absolutely. The evidence is abundant and is irrefutable. UNRWA was complicit in the October 7th attacks led by Hamas, and UNRWA has also been complicit in indoctrinating generations of Palestinian children to hate and incite against the Israeli state. The existence of UNRWA as a result is contrary to a two-state solution, and UNRWA should not be utilized as the vehicle through which Canada administers aid to the Palestinian people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Morantz. And now to MP Sorbara.
A few weeks ago, actually probably about 2 months ago, I visited the Toronto Holocaust Museum. I went down there and took a tour. And many years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Yad Vashem. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And one of the things that has struck me is the level of disinformation, misinformation, and folks not believing that the events of the Holocaust actually happened, especially younger folks, if I can say that, from what the data brings out. It is scary. It is also scary the level of anti-Semitism we are seeing here in Canada. The Jewish Canadians do not deserve that in any manner. I come from the city of Vaughan. We have a very, very bright, vibrant Jewish community, amongst many. We have I think over 120 languages are spoken in the city I live in, and one of the ridings I get to represent. So my first question to B'nai B'rith is with regards to the anti-racism strategy, to regards to countering this disinformation and anti-Semitism we're seeing. What are the most effective tools the government can provide, please?
Well, I'd like to point to our second recommendation in our submission, which is our strategy for an IRA literacy program. Canada has adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism in 2019 as part of our anti-racism strategy, which was renewed in 2024 for another 4-year period. However, there is a disconnect between the government strategy and its implementation, and as a result, we aren't seeing enough familiarity in the general public with this strategy and with this definition, and that's leading to the growing number or the growing figures as they relate to Holocaust denialism, to disinformation. So by ensuring that the next generation of Canadians, that's why we specifically want to target secondary and post-secondary age students, are familiar and understand the IRA definition and what really constitutes contemporary anti-Semitism, we can begin to reduce some of those alarming figures that you allude to, Minister. And the IRA is a working definition. It's a guide. It has examples. So if you have, if you don't understand the examples, if you're not using the guide, if the guide isn't made expressly available to all Canadians, then we're not properly implementing the definition.
Okay. If I can just have a follow-up question. On your recommendation 4, which I find very interesting, the digital archive of all records, why is that important to B'nai B'rith?
That is extremely important to B'nai B'rith because we're now almost 100 years removed from the Holocaust, and less each year we will have access to the testimony firsthand of survivors. It's important that we are able to learn from our past as a nation and that all Holocaust records are made available to the public so that, A, we can have clarity on Canada's role in immigration from to Canada of members of the Nazi Party or their affiliates, but also so that we can use those records to further advance our ability to teach the Holocaust and to spread Holocaust education across the country.
Of course. And I do hope to see the remaining hostages released and also see, of course, the ceasefire to come in effect and for peace to come in that area of the world, which we know are facing many concerns. And, of course, with today's events, it's a growing concern, obviously. I do want to just change channels to the CLC. Sir, you're an economist. I'm an economist. I heard so much of your testimony today. I do want to talk about one recommendation that you do bring up with regards to the labor market transfers. And we know the federal government provides the provinces a lot of money, I would say a ton of money on labor market transfers to make sure that Canadians have the skills to succeed in today's economy, in today's labor market. You do ask for, I believe, a top-up to labor market transfers, but what about just a general review of the labor market transfers? You know, sometimes just sending more money to provinces may not be the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. More money is not an answer in and of itself. However, this is a program that has proven itself to work quite well, and programs that are working well at times when there is need for the kinds of supports that they provide deserve to get more of the funding to provide more of that support. So we think this kind of successful program at a time when, as has already been mentioned, our labor markets are getting weaker and weaker. There's more and more upheaval in the kinds of jobs and employment that people have access to. So we need the kind of work that this money would help be done.
Now we're going to go to MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wood, thank you for joining us today. Just so I understand, would it be fair to say that your testimony today says that the trucking industry is primarily concerned with two things, one being the cost of the carbon tax, and two being what the industry commonly refers to as driver Inc.?
Correct.
With respect to the carbon tax, you said it was about $20,000 per truck. Did I have that number correct?
Yeah, between 15 and 20,000. That's based on the amount of fuel that goes into a vehicle, based on the miles that they run it, average annually.
Right. Today, the finance minister joyfully exclaimed that any businesses with employees that have less than 500 individuals will receive, I think, up to maybe $3,000. Is that going to make a difference to any of your members?
I'm not sure, sir. I'm not familiar with the comments that were made today, so I'd have to take that back.
Okay,
provide you an update.
Sure. I mean, that's just in respect of the carbon tax rebate for small businesses. So, but if you're paying $20,000 per truck on the road, I assume getting a $3,000 check back from the government's really not going to make much of a difference.
I think, sir, we'd have to take that back, but they're certainly, take it back and look at the math.
Okay.
I think too, just to clarify, so that is an increase. It's about a 6% increase in the overall total operating cost when you add those increases on an annual basis. So we talked about the razor thin margins and not a lot of room for things to happen to be able to recoup it and certainly pass it along. So certainly would want to look at that math and determine its potential impact.
Wow. So you're saying the carbon tax is adding a 6% increase in cost to your members? Generally.
Correct. Yeah.
I assume margins are probably, if you're saying they're razor thin, they're probably less than 5% already, maybe even lower, correct?
Depending on the sector being served, it can, it's very thin. 9.6 or 9.5 or 9.4 is probably what you'll see. But certainly, as you look at the numbers we've talked about today, it can eat into it pretty quick as the tax increases.
Okay, I want to try to connect these two issues here for a second, if I might. Sometimes you're maybe able to pass the cost along to your customer about the increasing in carbon tax. Sometimes you have to eat it. But as one of your customers, am I now incentivized to explore cheaper, maybe less scrupulous ways of shipping my goods if I'm being faced with price increases throughout the chain?
Of course you are. So those services would be offered, based on non-compliance, particularly on the side of CRA and on ESDC, like we've identified. That non-compliance allows an unscrupulous operator to lower their operating costs, lower their offerings to the supply chain at a more advantageous cost to folks that may want to purchase them. Some knowingly, some unknowingly. Majority of them are knowingly doing this.
So,
unfortunately.
Thank you very much for that testimony. So as I understand that the government's carbon tax has increased the costs to the industry such that now you have more individuals, potential customers, looking for ways to save money, which might actually be exacerbating the Driver Inc. problem to begin with. Would it be a fair characterization?
I think you could make the link. I think we'd have to look at that particularly. I can tell you that the Driver Inc. issue has been percolating for, like I said, it's at least 8 years we've been at this heavy with CRA and ESDC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood. Mr. Cochran, I enjoy a lot of your work. I will ask you in your personal capacity, not in representing your current role. There was a news article that saw the CRA been giving off waiving record amounts of debt that corporate taxpayers owe the government. The top 5 corporate write-offs was over $1 billion. Do you think that taxpayers deserve transparency about who these corporations are who are getting massive write-offs of their tax bill?
Yes. More transparency is almost always better.
The work we do to move very quickly into the green economy is incredibly important. And I know within my province of Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a tremendous amount of focus on really assisting to move our workforce into the realities of where we are in terms of the need to be very quickly move towards a green economy. So there's provincial supports in retraining. There's also industry and apprenticeship. How do you see taking your youth climate core and just beyond the words of collaboration, but how do you see really integrating what you were suggesting into existing programs? And either one of you, whoever would like to go first.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the conversations that we've been having with a lot of the ministries and policy directors of the targeted ministries of this campaign, we do want to look at the shortcomings of existing programs and how to expand that. But in essence, really, it's the program that we envision. The only existing program that's like it, that is existing inside of the government, is the military. If you think about a national paid job training program that's turning no one away right now, that is the military. That, tells young people that if they want in, then there's a space for them. And that's really how we are positioning the Youth Climate Corps, but one that focuses on climate adaptation and mitigation work, because we see the threat that our generation faces. And in terms of Newfoundland specifically, I think what you said is exactly right. All of the issues that we're facing as youth in the Atlantic region are facing it triple as hard, whether that's leaving their provinces to find work, general like skyrocket rents, but the wages are just not lining up. And so it's going to take a whole of government approach to create this model and like program and yeah, really looking at the military as one possible option of what this grand undertaking could look like that turns no one away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wood, I wanted to ask you, you had said that based on the current level of the carbon tax that it was costing on a per truck basis $15,000 to $20,000. And I know you confirmed that with my colleague, Mr. Chambers. The carbon tax is set to go to 61 cents a liter. Do you know at that level in 2030 what the cost per truck would be?
I don't have those specifics, but certainly can take that back and get you some math on that. I think what we did calculate though is currently in 2024 it's adding $2 billion a year to the total, and then by 2030 I think our estimates were up to about $4 billion annually. So again, the math would be pretty simple to do. I just don't have it at my fingertips.
So would it be safe to say that if it's $15,000 to $20,000 a truck at $2 billion, it would be $30,000 to $40,000 a truck at $4 billion?
It could be, sir. Again, I'd like to take that back and really have a little bit of a closer look at the numbers.
Yeah. You said
it's significant, though.
Yeah, fair enough. And what does this do to Canada's competitive standing with trucking companies in the United States? Does it make us less competitive when customers are looking for companies to ship their goods?
I mean, the carbon tax applies domestically. So the North, we'll call it North-South. So Canada-U.S. stuff really isn't affected. It's really the domestic, the mileage that's traveled domestically. I would say, to your point about competitiveness, it certainly makes the supply chain in Canada less competitive. If we're competing, for instance, with the United States, and you're investing in developing manufacturing businesses or whatever, ends up getting shipped by truck in the purely Canadian context, certainly at a disadvantage. I mean, the costs are exponential.
And you had touched on with Mr. Chambers this effect of the increased cost driving customers to use more Driver Inc. model companies. Did I have that correct?
So that's certainly going to be a factor. I think in the supply chain, certainly as folks that are tasked with managing their supply chains or their what we call their traffic departments, their goal is to get the lowest cost offerings, and a lot of the times they may be aware that the lowest cost offerings are on the backs of drivers who don't have workers' rights, et cetera, or companies that are unscrupulous, but could be a whole host of factors. Certainly something, that now that you've brought this up and your colleagues have brought this up, certainly something we're going to want to look at and see if it's exacerbating the problem.
And have you noticed any reduction in the volume of freight in the industry?
We're having a lot of challenges right now. It's not a good situation. Freight volumes are way down. If I were to, fortunately, I'm surrounded by a great team here, and we work for a number of fantastic folks that are on the front lines of this, and their things are dire right now. Too many trucks, not enough freight, a lot of challenges. What folks will tell you on rate pressure. So to your point about the supply chain looking for further cost reductions, it is a challenge. It's and to exacerbate that by the fact that we have approximately 30% of the business. Let's call it. Let's be frank here. 30% of the industry is in the underground economy or in the full grips of Driver Inc. And they're if you're a legitimate operator, you're having a really hard time. It's hard to truck the right way now, as we say, and we need help. We need ESDC to step up. We certainly need CRA to step up. We need the reinstatement of the T4A. So that's the paper trail between to contractors. It's been a moratorium for a long time. We need help. Certainly hope we're pre-budget and to everybody on the line here on the government side or amongst the government. Certainly, we're having some challenges. We've clearly outlined what the challenges are. We've just seen a lot of non-action, and for folks that are that want to run their businesses legally and compliantly, we can't figure out why the laws aren't being enforced, particularly by those two organizations. It's beyond. We can't figure it out.
The Trucking Association. Do you have any comments about interprovincial or the problems that we have with gatekeeping that prevents or adds expense to dealing between provinces?
Thank you for the question. So we've actually put together, we've done our interprovincial trade barriers report. So it outlines a host of items that we feel could use some attention. Again, it's fairly lengthy, sir. I'm happy to get into if there's any specific questions you have, but there are a host of them.
Yeah, I think that
are out there.
If I may, I think that members might not be aware of the different ways that costs are added to Canadians, and that there are discrepancies around everything from sort of tire sizes to fuel blends. Could you do you have just a few examples that you could quickly allow Canadians to just sort of understand the depth of regulatory problems that add cost to Canadians?
Sure. So I think and thanks for the question, because it's actually a report that I worked on. So I think we identified, not just regulatory but operational pieces. So the consistency of winter road maintenance standards, province to province to province, gives us consistency in transit times during inclement weather. We talked about the need to continue to fund truck rest areas and parking, so drivers can get their rest, and that brings the national highway system up to the codes that it's supposed to be.
So, if I may, just time's limited. Have you raised these issues before with the federal government?
Yes, we have.
Have they have they addressed any of these problems?
There are a host of mechanisms. Well, there's been a host of mechanisms around for 40, 50 years to deal with it. But the most recent round with, I believe it was Mr. LeBlanc and his efforts, so that has gone forward. So there seems to be traction there, and we're looking forward to participating in those efforts.
Okay, so you've talked about how the CRA is not effective in enforcing the law and the emergence of an underground trucking industry. Again, Canada has existing laws, though, that should protect workers and consumers, and also the agency should be able to properly collect its taxes. Do we need new laws, or do we need law enforcement?
We need law enforcement. We're not asking for anything new. We just want the law enforced.
Okay.
So if I were to give you some numbers, we say it's conservatively at $1 billion. It's more than that. It's $1 billion on the evasion side. On the company side, it's about $5 billion a year on the tax evasion by number of drivers. So it's a massive leakage. And again, we can't figure out why the laws aren't being enforced. Okay. And when you talk about that leakage, that's money that should go to supporting hospitals and healthcare and all of our social institutions. It's not there.
Okay, so the CRA is failing to collect taxes from within your industry, while at the same time, as Mr. Chambers pointed out, we see increasing write-offs for known tax for non-payment of taxes, but they're not collecting from your industry.
Correct.
You said it's $1 billion that they're failing to collect.
That's a minimum.
Minimum.
I would say. So there's two pieces. There's the corporate side of the taxes aren't contributed from the companies themselves, and then there's a significant portion of drivers that do not file. They don't pay.
Okay, and you've raised this at this committee before, or raised it in some way to the federal government?
For the past 8 years.
8 years. Okay, so for the last 8 years, they've been in power for 9. I guess for the last 8 years, they've been ignoring your repeated calls to deal with important tax avoidance and tax evasion.
In our opinion, correct. Yes, sir.
Wow, that's quite an indictment. So then, do you have any final? I've got only maybe half a minute. What final suggestion do you have on enforcing the laws that currently exist?
We just want the laws enforced, plain and simple, and make it a level playing field. Everybody pays their fair share and enforce the laws.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Kelly. And now we'll go to MP Zarowitz, please.
I'm going to actually give my first half of my time to Ms. Bendayan.
Okay, PS Bendayan.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, Chair. My question is for B'nai B'rith Canada. Our Prime Minister issued a strong condemnation of Iran's attacks of today. It is a fact that Iran is the largest sponsor of terrorism worldwide, and I am particularly concerned about further escalation, which leads me to your recommendation number 3, which calls for new investments to strengthen Canada's ability to monitor and prevent terrorism here at home. I would like to take the short amount of time that I have for you to put on the record your specific suggestions in that regard.
Absolutely. You cannot divorce the fact that recent terror plots in Canada were targeting the Jewish community from an exploration of how to counter those terror plots. We have an extremism problem in this country, and it's worsening. And as a result of that, we need to take proactive measures to ensure the safety of all Canadians, but especially the Jewish community in Canada, since the Jewish community is being targeted by these terror plots. So in order to combat this radicalism, this rise in extremism, we need additional funds to our national security apparatus, specifically our INSET teams, to be able to proactively monitor and to prevent these occurrences from happening before they take place. It's too late if we're catching people at the 11th hour as they're attempting to engage in acts of terror. It's too late if we're having to interrupt these people as they're in the late stages of these events. This shouldn't be taking place in Canada. We should have the funds and the resources available to our security apparatus so that we can stop these plots before they even start. And that's at the screening stages of individuals that are entering this country who are already radicalized, and that's at the stage of preventing people from becoming radicalized, whether it be online or in person here in Canada.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Ms. Zarowitz.
Thank you so much. My quick question is to Mr. Cochrane. Mr. Cochrane, I know that you had talked about the need for us to further expand our social welfare system. One of the things I talk about to my constituents is how proud I am that we have massively expanded our social welfare system over the last 9 years. And I hope you'll agree that in introducing the CCB, in increasing the OAS and the GIS, in introducing national child care, national dental care, Phase 1 of the disability benefits, among other things, we've done a fairly good job of expanding our social welfare system over the last 9 years. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And the other question I'd want to ask you is, one of the things that our government's been working with the CLC on is a construction pilot. It's a way of normalizing non-status construction workers who've been in Canada for over 10, 15, 20 years and their families. Are you familiar with the program?
Only vaguely.
Okay, it's okay. I was going to ask you a specific one, but anyways, just because I'm a very big believer in it, it continues to keep a lot of the workers who've been building our buildings and our cities here for a little longer, and I'm hoping that we will be able to expand that program just because it's become so successful. My last question actually is going to go to Mr. Klein of the Climate Emergency Unit. Mr. Klein, one of the many hats I wear is I travel internationally as chair of Canada-NATO Parliamentary Association. And when I talk to other countries, they are telling me that they're gearing up to actually put in a carbon tax or a price on pollution. And so my question to you is, as you know, our federal government's been implementing a comprehensive response to climate change. We've heard some testimony today, particularly from the trucking industry, that the price on pollution is expensive for some sectors. I wonder if you might have a comment on maybe the importance of us having this comprehensive plan on climate change at the federal level, which does include a price on pollution, and the importance of us continuing to have a price on pollution moving forward.
Well, you're asking a big question in the dying moments here. I'm a supporter of the principle of carbon pricing, but I also think it's been significantly oversold, both by its detractors and by its proponents. And it speaks a little bit to Mr. Cochrane's point of view. Canada is making progress on climate, but not nearly at the pitch and pace that the emergency requires. We are largely overly dependent on signals through carbon pricing and tax credits that aren't up to the task. We actually need a green industrial strategy, like Mr. Cochrane talked about, and a youth climate core that we've come to talk about. It could be another way of doing that. What the polling shows on the youth climate core is that there are, in fact, tens of thousands of young people who are simply saying, we get it, sign us up, please, and they're waiting for their invitation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Zarowitz. And we do have MP Morris is here, and I think
I'll ask for UC to let Mr. Morris, who's patient enough to sit through the entire committee meeting. He should be afforded a couple questions.
Very good. Okay, we're a collaborative bunch, and so MP Morris, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I want to start by saying thank you to Mr. Wood and the Canadian Trucking Alliance for raising the profile of the Drivers Inc. model. Not only does it avoid taxes, but it robs drivers of the benefits that they're entitled to. It seems to me like this is an opportunity to have parties working together. The governing party has put a pilot program into place that the Trucking Alliance is looking to see rolled out more widely, and it's clear that opposition parties want to see this done too. It's rare these days that we see points of alignment here, and I wonder amongst colleagues if it's something we could work on together over the coming weeks. I want to say thank you to Mr. Cochrane, particularly for your advocacy on the Canada Disability Benefit and getting it fixed, along with addressing the housing crisis by doubling the supply of affordable housing. My question is for Mr. Klein and Ms. Asgar. When it comes to the Youth Climate Core that you've advocated for, you mentioned that the U.S. has already, of course, put this into place earlier this year through the American Climate Core. You mentioned that the price tag being about $1 billion sounds like a lot, but we know if we put a windfall profit tax on oil and gas, we could raise $4.2 billion a year, as Mr. Cochrane also had called for. Can either of you speak to the lessons we can learn from the American Climate Core of what has worked there over the last few months, and also to the economic impacts of 20,000 young people in full-time work related to the climate economy that we're going to need going forward? What should my colleagues know about the economic impact of a youth climate core in the midst of a climate crisis? The kind of big idea I think we need at the, as you said, Mr. Klein, the pitch and the pace that we're at right now. Would one of you like to comment on that in about 45 seconds?
Yeah, Seth, if you're good, I think I want to take this one. So based on our research and using the 2023 income tax brackets, we actually found that an incremental income of a YCC graduate would earn, compared to a high school graduate, like that's $15,850 per year, the federal government would receive additional income taxes per person of up to $2,700 per year, not including deductions or tax credits. Provincial, territorial governments could receive up to $890 to $2,880 per year, not including deductions or tax credits. And over a 40-year career, this is up to $108,000 in additional revenue for the federal government, and up to $35,600 to $115,200 for provinces and territories. If the YCC creates 20,000 jobs per year for $1 billion, it would be paid back roughly in 10 to 15 years in additional income tax revenue. And that's not including all of the other things that we've talked about, which are like part and parcel of this incredible policy initiative.
And the only thing I'd love to add to that is that if we did, in fact, pay for this with an excess profits tax or windfall profits tax, as Mr. Cochrane suggested there, the net benefit in terms of tackling inflation would actually be positive. Like it would actually help with lowering prices. And there's a lovely symmetry to bringing in a windfall profits tax like that to pay for a program like this.
Well, thank you, and thank you, MP Morris. Great questions from everybody, and what an excellent panel we've had today for our pre-budget consultation in advance of the 2025 budget. We thank you for your testimony, and we wish you the best with the rest of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.